it comes out like 212 for an answer or something.
I think it's what, 43 or 46?
46.
What? I thought it was 143.
No, it's either 40. I think it's 43.
43 is the meaning of life.
No, yeah. The answer to all questions. The answer to all things is
From a mathematician's point of view.
from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, the Galaxy.
Okay. So from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe
Galaxy.
Galaxy, we have the number of...
Right, we're going to cut down his wine.
Sorry, folks, I drank my whole carafe of wine before we started tonight. So much... So much for the Alcoholics Anonymous evening.
That show's done.
Yes.
The step we're going to do tonight.
Okay. So,
Thank you for the report.
for what?
Thank you for the report.
You're welcome. Okay. So, Bill, do you have any recollection of what this... Okay, we're talking about, for everyone around the world, we're talking about Jung's Redbook for our time, and we're talking about the last essay in this book, which is the Redbook and the Posthuman. Did you hear that? The Posthuman. Okay.
Let's go right to Bill.
So, Bill, do you have any idea what this article is about?
Well, this is kind of weird. I feel like I'm ready for a radio broadcast here. I had, you sent that letter to Woodcock, and I went and looked at the article again because I couldn't really remember what it was about. What I liked about it was that it talked about language and the idea that there's a new language on the horizon that's driven by the new technology. And I thought that was cool. And I agree that that's what's happening. But I thought when Woodcock talked about it, he brought in all these examples of other people talking about changes in language or talking about language in general. It's people like Heidegger and Paul Deman and who's the other? Oh, there were a couple. Oh, Jung, of course. Anyway, the idea was that in any discourse, there's some sort of foundation or I call it posturing, but there's a way of looking at the world that is shaped by the very technologies you use. So, for example, if we rode horses every day, we would have metaphors that related to horse riding, or if we saw baseball games a lot, we might have baseball metaphors or football metaphors and so forth. And so the technology is sort of doing that to us now, except it's even more invasive. It sort of takes hold of you. It becomes not only metaphors for discussing things as if you're outside of it. It actually, you're inhabited by the technology so that you sort of become the technology and you view the world that way. So anyway, he's talking about that to some extent, I think. The other thing he talks about, though, is he brings in Heidegger and these guys who are the postmodern, let's say postmodernists, because they're talking about language and discourse, and they're talking about which discourses do you privilege and which ones do you diminish, and all of that. But they're talking about not technology or how that affects you. Well, Heidegger talks about that a bit, but they're talking about how there's a language that alludes to or refers to, let's say, God or the eternal, or that which doesn't, that experience that doesn't submit to what Jung calls opposites. You can't use black and white, or male, female. Those kinds of things can't be used because there's no direct object to refer to. And so he seems to me that he's conflating one kind of language and one discourse with another, and he's using the arguments of the ones talking about how language fails to capture the experience of a religious experience or a numinous experience. And he's talking about the language that's changed and being changed by the technology, which is also shaping us and changing the way we think and so forth. So there's one thing, no matter what your language is in terms of the technologies you use, the metaphors you use, and so forth, there's always something that eludes any kind of representation, and that's the language that Heidegger and Jung and those guys are talking about. So my problem with his article was that it seems like he's bringing the two together, these two different types of discourse, and he's not able, he sort of fudges around and mixes them together, and he doesn't really clarify what's going to happen with the changing discourse. For example, he says one of the one thing he keeps talking about is how we need a a new cultural a new cultural practices, and I don't see it right here right away, but anyway, the thing that entirely new cultural practices, and if you're my age, you know that back in the 60s we had an entirely new cultural practice that allowed us to experience and talk about numinous experiences, and it was called tripping. So that was that. From my generation, that's not a big leap. The other thing, I forget what I was going to say now. Woodcock he seems to be repackaging some of the stuff that came up in the past. I don't know how old he is or anything. But it's what artists and philosophers, spiritual explorers, and others, people involved with numinous experiences and trying to convey that language through some kind of language that it gets that across. I think he's confusing that with the one where the medium is the massage, sort of the McLuhan idea that the medium. Yeah. It's the technology is shaping us, but it has nothing to do with the two different discourses.
So you're saying that technology is influencing the first discourse, the first type of discourse, which is the one that doesn't get to the essence, but it's a representation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's influencing that one, but not the numinous experiential side of things.
See, in my mind, the numinous, if you're trying to represent a numinous experience, you're going to use the language at hand. You can't just manufacture something. So it's always going to be placed historically. And so if you're talking, if you're back 2,000 years ago, you might be talking about camels and the eye of a needle. Whereas now you might be talking, some other sort of metaphor. So yeah, it shapes.
But what are you saying about technology? What is he saying about technology?
He's saying it's making us posthuman because we are. What does he say? Well, I wasn't ready for that part. He's saying that the technology is changing the language, and we are not. we I don't know. What does he say?
Wait a minute. Let me back up here. Let me back up because
My take on it wasn't the whole article. It was just what I thought he was the flaw in the article was.
right. Okay. Look, there's no question that technology is changing humanity. Okay. Everybody in the world is walking around with a smartphone in their hand, staring at the freaking thing, walking through the mall. I mean, even I've walked into walls staring at my iPhone.
Especially now.
Especially now, okay. And so technology is changing us, okay. But where I'm having trouble is the word, okay, in the sense of, and probably this goes back to pre-Christianity, but, or at least at the time that the Bible was finally conflated together. In the beginning was the Word, okay, that was Matthew, I think, or something like that. And so the question is, does linguistics, does language per se, represent God? Okay, in the beginning was the Word. And, that's always been a troublesome idea to me. But Dr. Woodcock's essay certainly emphasizes that idea of linguistics being in control. And so the implications of that, when we've opened up the world. Now, English language has become the global language, okay? We can't deny that. And yes, there are pockets of Arabic, and you name it, on the internet. But if anybody wants to communicate with the collective unconscious, they're going to have to do it in English, basically. And so, but I don't think that in any way, I don't think the language conveys what's happening, okay, because we've opened up this global consciousness. It's going trillions of times a day, back and forth, so the collective unconscious is suddenly coming together for better or for worse. And okay, China's cut off a bit. Russia isn't so much cut off anymore. Africa's cut off for financial reasons, because people can't afford a smartphone. But everywhere else in the world, people are communicating all day long. Okay, and so it is changing us. The technology is changing us. I'm not convinced that linguistics is the reason.
All right. Well, one thing you said in your letter to Woodcock had to do with Telos, and the idea of the Telos of the Psyche. And I just sort of remember I think what he was saying at one point was that does the technology change the using the word telos to mean the goal of the psyche, the job towards which the psyche is moving or performing, and the idea that he seems to want to equate the posthuman with the idea that the technology is going to change the telos of the psyche, so that we're actually a different animal, and I wouldn't agree with that. As for linguistics, I think that's just a piece of the puzzle. It certainly gets rid of image, which would, which seems to me even though Derrida might disagree, I think image precedes it all, depending exactly on what you mean by image. But so I think you're right in that regard.
Okay, all right, so let me explain my issue about telos. Okay, the word telos, T-E-L-O-S, and my wife, Debbie, tells me that if you have to use Greek or Latin, you don't know what you're talking about.
Disagree.
You disagree.
Oh, absolutely.
Why?
Because if there's a word, why not just borrow it? I mean, what are we, the French Academy? We're going to say, okay, now if only these words are accepted as French words and the rest of them are thrown out.
No, but the problem is that Greek and Latin words as used, okay?
We adapt them to our use.
Okay, and the
it's a living language.
Right, and that's right. We do adapt them to our use, and as you saw in my email to Dr. Woodcock, I intentionally used two Latin phrases because they represent part of the fruitcake. In other words, those words are symbols for other things. What Dr. Jung talked about was symbols, and words are symbols, and so the word telos has to be seriously unpacked before the average person out here in the world understands what the hell is being.
But the average person's not reading this stuff.
Yeah, that's the problem. The average person isn't reading this stuff, but the average person is out here talking, paying attention to what we're saying for whatever reason, and I'm glad that you're doing it, mind you. Okay, but
Find out who it is.
well, and we want to know who you are, so by all means, speak up. There's now over 600 of you, so we must be talking about something that resonates. Okay, but here's the fundamental issue about telos to me, which relates back to Dr. Arzt's essay, the very first essay in this book, and Dr. Woodcock's is the very last one. But Dr. Arzt's essay contains in it a quote from a letter to the Reverend Morton T. Kelsey from Dr. Jung, dated May the 3rd, 1958. And the quote is, and he's referring to Christianity now, and he says, we are still looking back to the Pentecostal events in a dazed way, instead of looking forward to the goal of the Spirit, to the goal the Spirit is leading us to. Okay, and so Dr. Woodcock, I lost my train of thought. No, okay. Bill doesn't want to talk about that.
Well, what am I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, but all right, but telos means, okay, if you look up the definition of telos, which this morning I was looking at Dr. Woodcock's essay.
Or if you're taking any philosophy course.
Right. Okay, well, I didn't take a philosophy course, except symbolic logic, okay?
No,
but
not that.
Not that, okay. All right, so the point is, even I had to look up the meaning of the term telos when I read Dr. Woodcock's article. And telos means the goal. Okay, the goal of the...
It's Aristotle first used it, I know of.
Okay, so Aristotle used it. Terrific.
Well, it's been around for a few thousand years. I mean,
well, okay.
Some people catch on,
Okay, but lawyer MBAs haven't caught on.
Sort of thing, yeah.
You have something to say, John?
I was just saying, I'm assuming it's the root of the word teleological, which is there's an end goal in sight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. It is. Okay, and it's not an English word, it's a Greek word, but
It's Greek root.
okay.
How
Teleological
many
is
English words don't have a
okay,
root?
but the average person doesn't even know what
What a
teleological.
dictionary is.
Well, we know what a dictionary is, and I had to
They no
go.
longer have them in the government. They got rid of them all. You can just go online. Okay.
I actually was given a dictionary for
were given
being
away
number
the
one in
government,
two
too.
classes in my high school class, which got me a dictionary, which I finally gave away to somebody in Africa. Okay, but anyway, Telos. As of this morning at 6 a.m., I did not know the meaning of the word telos, and okay, I looked it up in the dictionary online, and it means the goal. Okay, so that reminds me of Dr. Arst's article, where he's talking about the whole issue of the spirit and where the spirit is going. And he says, and Dr. Jung says, and this is a Jungian reading group, so that's why we're talking about it in this way. We are still looking back at the Pentecostal events, in other words, the beginning events of Christianity, in a dazed way instead of looking forward to the goal the Spirit is leading us to. Okay, and so that's the significant thing. What is the goal of the Spirit? And I don't see how linguistics gets us there. Do you wish to comment on that point?
Linguistics. I don't know what to say. I mean, linguistics.
I have something about the substance of what Dr. Jung wrote that I would like to ask you.
Okay, go ahead.
You and Bill. Okay. So, actively in the Christian church, correct me if I'm wrong, but the teaching about Pentecost is to extend the influence of the Spirit into contemporary life. In other words, it's not so much looking backwards as it is a historical example of the beginning of the grant of the Spirit to every human being, and that was to be carried forth. But it's more of a carrying operation and not a development from within operation. Do you agree with me there? So it's more static, I think, than what Jung had in mind.
I don't think that's what Jung had in mind, but I think that's what the Christian church has
That's
done.
what I'm saying.
I think that's what,
He had a more dynamic
yeah, Dr. Jung had a more dynamic
vision of it.
vision. Okay, so Dr. Jung's vision in the Redbook, which I happen to have brought this evening. Okay, Dr. Jung's vision in the Redbook was that there was a living objective psyche. Something is living within us. Not us, not our ego, but something in the unconscious is alive. And the problem with Christianity is that it has been flashbanged, okay, to use a modern warfare concept. It's been totally stunned and hypnotized by the Pentecost. And so when you go into a Christian church today, be it Christian, Catholic or Protestant, they're going to talk about stuff that happened 2,000 years ago instead of talking about stuff that is relevant to my life today. And
I
that's,
see it deeper than that.
you see what deeper than that?
I see it more as an exemplar or an example of how to tap into the Spirit. So I don't think it just dies on the vine by saying it happened 2,000 years ago. I think that what I'm basing this on what I've heard in sermons is that it's taught as the Spirit is a living thing, But it's knowing about Jung, I believe that it's in Christianity, it's more meant as sort of an ego-driven thing rather than the
Even in
object.
Catholicism?
Well, I haven't heard a Catholic sermon for a long time, so I don't know. But my point is that it's not a past-looking thing so much as it is an exemplar to live by.
Okay, it's an exemplar to live by in some sense that, when I'm in church and I'm hearing this stuff about guys that lived 2,000 years ago, I go,
Well, it's a grant. It's a grant that the spirit was infused then, and it's a grant of spirit to every human being.
okay, well, look, I believe in the living spirit, okay? I never got that living spirit per se out of any sermon I ever heard. Okay, I got it out of experiences, and I acknowledged a couple weeks ago that I had 3 experiences within the facility of a church, but none of them came from any teaching that I got from the pulpit. Not one. Okay, and
That's why I'm saying it's more of a static kind of idea of spirit rather than a dynamic, internalized, experiential contact with spirit. That's all I'm saying.
right.
But I wouldn't agree that it's a moribund dead thing.
Okay, I'm not saying that Christianity is moribund and dead. I'm saying that the way Christianity is taught is moribund and dead because it does not reflect to me the living spirit, which I don't believe I know. Okay, I know the living spirit. I've experienced the living spirit. I never got it out of Christianity. And the fundamental issue for me, the thing that is burning me, and the reason that I'm making these videos is because Christianity has meaning, certainly, and it allowed humanity, at least in the West, to develop for 2,000 years. But Nietzsche was right. The way we teach Christianity is dead, and we need to revivify it. And Christian theologians around the world, and I'm not sure about Muslim theologians, but certainly Christian theologians, and perhaps Jewish theologians, have to revivify their religions in order for them to be meaningful at all.
Is it even possible to revivify these
Well, I believe
these structures?
I believe it is. I believe it is, but it's not going to happen until theologians themselves grok what Dr. Jung was talking about, and they haven't done it. But this article is at the essence of what we're talking about.
Saying that it needs to be a polytheistic approach, right? And I think Thomas More is even in that vein.
Can I?
Okay, that's a different issue, but go ahead.
I was gonna go back to the Woodcock's article about the linguistically configured world.
Yeah.
And I had, while you guys were talking, I was thinking about what he was writing about, and what he's doing there. And I'm not sure what this has to do with the Word and God, but he's connecting the Telos of the Psyche with the language we use, and how by looking at the language of our linguistically configured world, which is the postmodern, the posthuman. I'm sorry, the posthuman world. We can find the telos of the spirit by examining the linguistics, of the language, by looking at the language that's developing out of the technology. That's what I think I'm getting from him. So it's not like he's saying that the whole world is linguistically configured. He's saying within that language we can find out what the spirit is looking for, because even as the artist and everyone else he mentions in there was looking for meaning in life, he's saying that you can find it if you begin to look at the language that we're using because of the technology. So that, for me, I could buy into a little better, because he's not really talking about everything. He's really saying that the technology shaped the language, and within the language, if you begin to look at that, you can find out what it is that the goal of the spirit is, or the goal of the psyche. Sorry. No.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not saying no. I'm saying.
Well, I'm just trying to put together what he said and
Okay.
make sense of it.
All right. Well, in order to make sense of it, let's go to the issue of posthuman. Okay, this term posthuman, and specifically also, he uses several terms that are questionable in my view for the layman. Okay, they may not be questionable for Jungian analysts, I acknowledge, but for the layman, the use of the terms alien and posthuman are big questions for me. Okay, and I think I understand what he's driving at by posthuman, but what do you think he's talking about by the term posthuman and alien?
Okay, the first thing I think of when he says alien is that Burroughs quote, William
Burroughs.
Yeah, language is a virus from outer space.
Okay.
Which is the reason being that technology is not human. It's alien, and it's also becoming more and more removed from being a human. So therefore, it's alien because it's creating an alien language that we're inhabiting, and so.
Okay.
And by
I
thereby,
acknowledge that it's not part of the body per se, and as such, it's not human.
yeah, okay, well, but even it has nothing to do with our day-to-day intercourse with life. You go milk a cow, you play baseball, all those things are human involved. Technology exists in and of itself. It actually is sort of a parallel implementation of a quasi pseudo life form or something. So it's an alien, and if we're beginning to adopt that language, we're taking on an alien language, and we thereby become posthuman because we're machine-like in a way.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think we don't know yet. I think it can be both, either or both and either or.
Wouldn't the same thing have happened with Gutenberg and printing a book?
It did. It did.
So wasn't that posthuman then?
I think not, because it. Well, no, I don't think so. Because I don't know. I didn't read the guy that thoroughly, but I think because humans are still so engaged with the technology, whether it be Gutenberg, television, you're sitting there looking at other humans, telegraph, you're sending between humans, but this technology here, for example, AI's over there problem solving things, we don't even know how it does it. That's certainly not human. Doesn't need us to come up with that answer.
Okay. All right. Well,
And then that begins affecting us, and thereby we become posthuman, because, which makes no sense in a way, but that's just, There's a lot of people that write like that now. You know, everybody's been writing that way. He's on the tail end of it.
Okay, all right. Well, let me first.
Trying to think of the guy who really writes about this stuff.
Okay. So Bill, do you believe that artificial intelligence per se, okay, is an alien that can take over the world and we can't pull the plug on it?
God, what's the meaning of life? Well, the meaning of life is 43.
Okay, I mean,
Yeah, I don't. You know, my problem with AI, and it's, you know, I started thinking about it about 30, 40 years ago. When connectionism was big and it was being poo-pooed because it basically needed bigger, faster processors. Anyway, the problem I found with AI taking over the world is what would be its motivations? Why would it aspire to anything? Does it have any needs, and so forth? And of course, you can
program in needs.
yeah, you can do that, but you can also now with this connectionism, or with what they call now machine learning, or whatever else they call it, the machines can begin to develop their own needs and aspirations, but and they would certainly not be human. Yeah, it's possible, but I don't think that's what's going to happen, because I don't think the technology is going to exist apart from us. I think the technology is going to become an augmentation and an extension of us, rather than sitting over there like our laptop does. It'll be integrated within us, so that we will be really post-human then, and it won't be simply cyborgs where we have, $1 million man arms and legs and stuff. We will actually our consciousness will be changed. And if you want to see the interface for that, check out my patent. That's the first stage of it.
Nobody can find your patent because nobody knows who you are.
That's right.
But I was going to comment that technology creates new forms, though. And as an example, I give chess-playing computers are coming up with moves that humans are sort of surprised by, because they're very subtle moves that lead to other things, because the machine can see so deeply into combinations. So it's actually changing the way grandmasters have played the game in their openings, because they're saying, well,
There you go.
so it's actually it's creating that form itself.
You have to think 32 levels deep instead of 16 or something.
We all need a mentor, right? Turn my mentor on.